When Ryan, a loyal and hardworking senior accountant, is falsely accused of embezzling $300,000, his entire life collapses in an instant. Fired, humiliated, and blacklisted in his industry, he's left with nothing but a burning desire for justice and revenge. As Ryan digs deeper, he uncovers a sinister trail of evidence leading to his former boss, the corrupt and manipulative CEO, Howard, who framed him to cover up his own crimes. What begins as a quest to clear his name quickly spirals into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Ryan secretly builds a rival business to siphon Howard's biggest clients, systematically dismantling the company that betrayed him. But when Howard fights back with a shocking twist, Ryan must outwit his cunning former boss in a battle of wits, secrets, and double crosses. In a scandalous finale filled with unexpected turns, Ryan's revenge goes far beyond exposing Howard. It transforms him into the owner of the empire that once tried to destroy him. But at what cost? This is a gripping tale of betrayal, resilience, and the ultimate payback, where karma isn't just served, it's personally delivered. They say the higher you climb, the harder you fall. For me, that fall came out of nowhere, and it shattered everything I'd spent years building. At the time, I thought it was just bad luck. A misunderstanding. But now I know better. It wasn't an accident. It was sabotage. And it all started on an otherwise unremarkable Monday morning. The air felt heavy as I walked into the office that day. Maybe it was the weather, a gray drizzle blanketed the city, or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I didn't have much time to think about it. My phone buzzed with notifications, and I had a stack of files to review before our 10 a.m. client meeting. Just another busy day at Westbridge & Company, or so I thought. "Morning, Jenna," I said as I passed my assistant's desk. She looked up from her computer, her face unusually pale. "You okay?" Her eyes darted to the side. Yeah. Fine. Just tired." I nodded, brushing it off, and headed to my office. But the uneasy feeling lingered. By the time I sat down, I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. The first sign came 5 minutes later when my inbox flooded with emails, all marked urgent. The subject lines were vague: discrepancy in accounts, immediate action required, meeting request. I barely had time to open the first one before a shadow fell across my desk. Ryan Morrison. I looked up to find 2 security guards standing in the doorway. My heart skipped a beat. Yeah. Can I help you?" "We need you to come with us," one of them said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Confused, I stood up. "Is something wrong?" "Just come with us, sir." My pulse quickened as I followed them through the hallways. The whispers started almost immediately. Co-workers poked their heads out of cubicles, their curious stares like daggers in my back. Jenna's wide-eyed expression flashed through my mind, and I realized she must have known something. But what? They led me to the HR conference room, where Sheila from HR sat across the table with her laptop open. Beside her was my boss, Mr. Howard, his face a mask of stern disapproval. The tension in the room hit me like a freight train. "Ryan," Howard began, his voice devoid of the usual warmth he reserved for team meetings. "We need to discuss a serious matter." I frowned, glancing at Sheila, who avoided my gaze. "What's going on?" Howard folded his hands on the table. "We've discovered some significant discrepancies in the company's financial accounts. After a thorough review, we've determined that the missing funds, nearly $300,000, can be traced back to you." For a moment, I couldn't process what I'd just heard. "What? That's insane. There must be some kind of mistake." He slid a folder across the table. "This is no mistake. Our IT team found that your login credentials were used to access restricted financial accounts. Transactions were made, funds were diverted, and the trail leads directly to you." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were printouts of financial records, transaction logs, and timestamps, all pointing to my account. But none of it made sense. I had never accessed those accounts. Never approved those transactions. I didn't do this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Howard leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. The evidence says otherwise. But I've been here for 6 years. I've always been loyal to this company. Why would I risk everything for this? Sheila cleared her throat. Ryan, regardless of your intentions, the company has no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately. Additionally, we'll be conducting a full investigation and reporting the matter to the authorities. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Terminated. Authorities. My career, my reputation, everything I'd worked so hard for, was crumbling right before my eyes. You can't do this, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. I'm being set up. Someone's trying to frame me. Howard's expression didn't waver. We're done here, Ryan. Before I could say another word, the security guards reappeared and escorted me out of the building. The walk back to my desk was the longest, most humiliating walk of my life. Every step felt like dragging 100-pound weight. Co-workers stared, whispered, and avoided eye contact as I grabbed my things and left. By the time I reached the parking lot, the anger had started to set in. This wasn't just a mistake. Someone had set me up. And I had a pretty good idea who it was. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within hours, news of my firing spread like wildfire. Howard must have made sure everyone in the industry heard about it, because by the end of the week, my phone stopped ringing altogether. Every recruiter, every company I reached out to, it was the same story. No one wanted to hire an accountant with a reputation for theft. I spent the next few weeks in a daze. My savings dwindled as I struggled to make ends meet. Rent, bills, groceries, it all added up, and soon I was drowning in debt. Eventually, I had no choice but to move back in with my parents. At 32 years old, I was living in their basement, surrounded by boxes of my old life, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. For a while, I let the anger consume me. I'd replay that meeting in the HR office over and over in my head, thinking of all the things I should have said, all the ways I could have defended myself. But no amount of rage or regret could change what had happened. I had to focus on the future. On clearing my name. The first step was to figure out who had framed me. And for that, I needed evidence. The breakthrough came late one night as I scoured the files I'd managed to download before leaving the office. Among the hundreds of spreadsheets and transaction logs, I found something curious, a pattern of small, incremental transfers made over several years. The amounts were just small enough to avoid triggering suspicion, but when added up, they totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. More importantly, I noticed that these transactions all led to a single offshore account. The account number wasn't familiar, but the timing of the transfers lined up perfectly with Mr. Howard's sudden lifestyle upgrades, his new car, the luxury vacations, the country club membership. It was all starting to make sense. Howard had stolen the money. And he'd used me as a scapegoat to cover his tracks. But knowing the truth wasn't enough. I needed proof, something concrete that could expose him. That's when I reached out to Jenna. It took some convincing, but she finally agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the office. She looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder as she slid into the booth across from me. "I can't talk for long," she whispered. "I just need to know one thing," I said. "Did you notice anything strange before I was fired? Anything about Howard?" She hesitated, biting her lip. I don't know if I should be talking to you." "Please, Jenna. You know me. You know I didn't do this." Her shoulders slumped. "Okay, look. A couple of weeks before everything happened, I saw Howard meeting with someone in his office. I don't know who it was, but they were looking at some kind of documents. They seemed tense. Documents? I leaned forward. What kind of documents? I don't know. Financial reports, I think. But after that, Howard started acting weird. He was in a bad mood all the time, snapping at people. And then, well, you know what happened. It wasn't much, but it was a start. If Howard was meeting with someone about financial reports, it could mean he was trying to cover his tracks, or shift the blame. Either way, it was enough to keep digging. Thanks, Jenna, I said. You don't know how much this means to me. She nodded, but her expression was grim. Be careful, Ryan. Howard doesn't play fair. She was right. But neither did I. Howard didn't play fair, but I had nothing left to lose. When someone has ripped apart your life, destroyed your reputation, and left you for dead, you stop worrying about rules and start focusing on one thing: payback. The night after my meeting with Jenna, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop screen in my parents' basement, surrounded by empty coffee cups and discarded notes. The offshore account I had uncovered in the files gnawed at me. The transfers, the timing, the secrecy, it all pointed to Howard. I just needed to connect the dots. But the problem was, I didn't have access to the information I needed anymore. I'd been locked out of the company's systems the moment I was fired. To prove Howard's guilt, I'd have to get creative. That's when I remembered an old contact, Jason, an IT specialist I'd worked with at Westbridge. Jason wasn't just good with computers, he was brilliant. He'd been the guy everyone turned to when systems crashed or files went missing. And luckily for me, he also wasn't particularly fond of Howard. We met at a quiet bar on the edge of town. Jason was already seated at a booth when I walked in, sipping on a beer and looking as scruffy as ever. He raised an eyebrow as I slid into the seat across from him. Well, if it isn't Westbridge's Most Wanted, he said with a smirk. Funny, I replied, though I didn't smile. Thanks for meeting me. He leaned back, studying me. What's this about, Ryan? You planning to clear your name, or are we talking revenge? Both, I said bluntly. That got his attention. Okay, I'm listening. I laid out everything I'd discovered, the discrepancies in the accounts, the offshore transfers, Howard's suspicious behavior. Jason listened intently, nodding occasionally as he sipped his beer. When I finished, he leaned forward, his expression serious. You're saying Howard set you up? Without a doubt, I replied. But I need proof. Real proof. And I can't get it without help. Jason tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. You realize what you're asking me to do, right? Hacking into Westbridge's systems is no joke. If we get caught, it's jail time for both of us. I know the risks, I said. But I also know Howard deserves to go down for this. He stole the money. He ruined my life. And he's probably still getting away with it. Jason sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right. I'll help. But if we do this, we do it my way. No shortcuts. No mistakes. Deal, I said, relief flooding through me. Over the next 2 weeks, Jason and I worked in secret. He set up a secure network in his apartment, complete with encrypted servers and firewalls. Watching him work was like watching an artist paint, his fingers flew over the keyboard as lines of code scrolled across the screen. Westbridge's security isn't bad, he said one night, leaning back in his chair. But it's not great either. I can get us in. The tricky part is finding the right files without setting off any alarms. Do whatever it takes, I told him. By the 3rd week, we had our breakthrough. Jason managed to access Westbridge's internal servers and locate the audit logs for the past 5 years. These logs recorded every financial transaction, every login, every change made to the system. It was a goldmine of information. Bingo, Jason muttered, scrolling through the data. "Look at this." I leaned over his shoulder, my eyes scanning the screen. There it was, a trail of suspicious transactions, all leading to the offshore account I'd found earlier. But that wasn't all. Jason clicked on a separate file, an email chain between Howard and a man named Carl Withers, a consultant I recognized from years ago. The emails were damning. "Howard, the funds have been transferred. Make sure everything is buried before the audit." Carl understood. "And the scapegoat?" "Howard, already taken care of." I felt my blood boil as I read the messages. This wasn't just a setup, it was premeditated. Howard had planned everything, right down to making me the fall guy. "There's your proof," Jason said, leaning back. "But if you're going to use this, you'll need to be smart about it. Howard's not the kind of guy who goes down without a fight." Jason was right. Exposing Howard wouldn't be enough. I needed to take him down in a way that left no room for him to weasel out of it. But as I stared at the incriminating files on Jason's screen, a new idea began to form in my mind. What if I didn't just expose Howard? What if I destroyed him entirely? To do that, I needed leverage. Not just on him, but on the company itself. "Jason," I said slowly, "can you get me a list of Westbridge's biggest clients? Contracts, contact info, anything you can find." He frowned. "Why? What are you planning?" "Let's just say I'm not settling for justice. I want revenge." Jason hesitated, but eventually, he nodded. "Give me a few days." By the end of the week, Jason had everything I needed. Westbridge's client list was a treasure trove of opportunity. These weren't just small businesses, they were multi-million-dollar accounts, the lifeblood of the company. If I could pull them away, Westbridge would collapse. The first step was reaching out to the clients. I spent hours crafting emails and calls, positioning myself as a freelance consultant offering better rates and personalized services. I didn't mention Howard or Westbridge directly, I didn't need to. Most of the clients were already dissatisfied with the company's performance. All they needed was a reason to leave. And I gave them one. It started small, just one or two clients signing on with me. But within weeks, the trickle became a flood. Word spread quickly in the financial world, and soon, Westbridge's biggest accounts were abandoning ship. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence against Howard. Every email, every transaction, every piece of incriminating data, Jason and I compiled it into a detailed report, complete with screenshots and timestamps. By the time we were done, we had enough to bury him. But I wasn't ready to go public just yet. Not until I'd dealt the final blow. With Westbridge hemorrhaging clients and revenue, the company was on the brink of collapse. Howard must have been scrambling to hold everything together, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the walls came crashing down. And when they did, I'd be there to finish what he started. Howard's world was starting to crumble, but I wasn't satisfied with just watching it fall. I wanted to be the one to bring it down, and I wanted him to know it was me. The shift started quietly at first. By the end of the second month of siphoning clients from Westbridge, the industry chatter had grown deafening. "Westbridge is losing its edge," people said. "They're bleeding accounts." I couldn't help but smirk as I listened to the whispers, knowing I was the reason. But my plan wasn't just about stealing clients or hitting Howard where it hurt most. I wanted to destroy the entire legacy he'd built on lies and theft. I wanted him to feel the same humiliation and helplessness I had felt. It was time to strike the next blow. One morning, as I sat at my desk in my parents' basement, a setup that had become my makeshift war room, Jason called. "You need to see this," he said, his voice urgent. "What's going on?" "Westbridge just posted their quarterly financials. It's bad. Like, really bad." He sent over the report, and my jaw dropped as I scanned the numbers. Revenue was down by 60%. Expenses were skyrocketing. And the company was barely staying afloat. Howard's going to be desperate, Jason said. If he doesn't find a way to stop the bleeding, Westbridge won't survive another quarter. I leaned back in my chair, thinking. Desperation could make Howard reckless, and reckless people make mistakes. That's exactly what I was counting on. Jason, I said, do you think you can monitor their internal communications? Emails, memos, anything that might tell us what Howard's next move is? He hesitated. That's risky. If they catch me. They won't, I said firmly. Just keep an eye on him. If Howard's planning something, I need to know about it. Over the next few weeks, Jason kept me updated. Howard was scrambling. He'd called emergency meetings with the board, slashed budgets, and even tried to renegotiate contracts with the few remaining clients they had left. None of it was working. Then, one evening, Jason called again. You're not going to believe this, he said. What? Howard's planning to sell. I froze. Sell? Sell what? The entire company. He's looking for buyers to take over Westbridge before it collapses completely. My mind raced. Howard wasn't just trying to save himself, he was trying to cash out before the ship sank entirely. If he succeeded, he'd walk away with millions while everyone else, including his employees, was left to clean up the mess. Do you know who he's talking to? I asked. Not yet, Jason replied. But I'll find out. It didn't take long for Jason to uncover the buyer, a large private equity firm with a reputation for acquiring struggling businesses, gutting them for parts, and flipping them for a profit. The deal wasn't finalized yet, but it was clear Howard was trying to fast-track the process. I couldn't let that happen. Howard didn't deserve to walk away with anything, let alone millions of dollars. I needed to stop the sale, and I knew exactly how to do it. The exposé was my nuclear option. For months, Jason and I had been gathering evidence against Howard, emails, financial records, and transaction logs that proved his embezzlement and fraudulent behavior. Now, it was time to unleash it. I reached out to a journalist I knew, Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in investigative reporting. She was sharp, relentless, and had a reputation for taking down corrupt executives. If anyone could blow this story wide open, it was her. We met in a small cafe downtown. I handed her a thick folder filled with everything Jason and I had collected. This is everything, I said. Emails, account numbers, transaction histories. It proves Howard embezzled company funds and pinned it on me to cover his tracks. Sarah flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing as she read. This is big, she said. If this checks out, it'll destroy him, and the company. That's the idea, I replied. She looked at me for a long moment. You know, once this goes public, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready for that? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The article was published 2 weeks later. The headline was brutal: CEO caught in massive embezzlement scandal, Westbridge and Company on the brink of collapse. The exposé detailed everything: Howard's theft, the offshore accounts, the cover-up, and how he'd pinned it all on me. Sarah had done her homework, corroborating every piece of evidence I'd given her. The article went viral almost immediately, spreading across social media and news outlets like wildfire. The fallout was immediate. Clients who hadn't already left Westbridge dropped them overnight. Employees quit in droves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The private equity firm that had been in talks to buy the company backed out, citing reputational risks. And Howard? He was finished. I watched the chaos unfold from the comfort of my parents' basement, a mix of satisfaction and vindication washing over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But I wasn't done yet. While Howard scrambled to contain the damage, I made my final move. Using the connections I'd built with my new clients, I positioned myself as the ideal buyer for Westbridge's remaining assets. By now, the company was practically worthless, and I knew the board would be desperate to sell. I made them an offer, pennies on the dollar. They didn't have much of a choice. 2 weeks later, the deal was finalized. I officially owned everything Howard had built. The day I walked into the office building that once belonged to Westbridge and Company, I felt a sense of poetic justice. Howard's name had already been stripped from the walls, and the place was eerily quiet, a shell of its former self. I sat down at the desk that used to belong to him, leaning back in the chair as I took it all in. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding something better. Howard had destroyed my life. But in doing so, he'd handed me the tools to create something far greater. The day Howard's empire became mine was supposed to mark the end of my revenge. I had everything I wanted, his clients, his company, and his reputation in ruins. He was disgraced, facing criminal charges, and Westbridge was now under my control. But as I sat at his old desk, staring out at the skyline from the corner office, a strange emptiness settled over me. For months, my every waking moment had been consumed by revenge. And now that it was over, I wasn't sure what came next. I had won. But at what cost? The scandal had made headlines for weeks, and the media attention wasn't letting up. Howard was under investigation for embezzlement, and Westbridge's collapse had become a cautionary tale in the business world. But then something unexpected happened. 2 weeks after I took over the company, I received a letter. It wasn't from a lawyer or a creditor, it was from Howard himself. The envelope was thick, and the handwriting on the front was neat, almost meticulous. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a typed letter, and as I read it, my stomach sank. Ryan. Congratulations on taking everything from me. You must feel pretty good about yourself. But before you start thinking you've won, let me make one thing clear, this isn't over. You think you exposed me, humiliated me, and destroyed my reputation. But what you don't realize is that I was playing a much bigger game, and you just walked right into it. That offshore account you found? The one you think proves my guilt? It's not mine. It's yours. You see, while you were busy plotting your little revenge, I was one step ahead. I knew you'd dig into the accounts, find the emails, and take the bait. And now, as far as the authorities are concerned, you are the mastermind behind this entire scheme. I have copies of everything, the fake emails, the forged transaction logs, all of it. The moment I go to the authorities with this, they'll see you as the real culprit. And believe me, I'll do it. Unless, of course, we come to an arrangement. I want $2 million wired to my new account within 48 hours. If I don't get it, I'll burn everything to the ground, and you'll go down as the criminal you worked so hard to expose me as. Tick-tock, Ryan. Sincerely, Howard. I sat frozen, the letter trembling in my hands. My first instinct was disbelief, this had to be a bluff. Howard was desperate, grasping at straws. But as the reality sank in, doubt crept into my mind. Could he have actually set me up again? The timing of everything, the embezzlement, the forged emails, the offshore account, had been so perfect. Too perfect. And as much as I hated to admit it, Howard was cunning enough to pull it off. Jason had helped me uncover the evidence, but what if that evidence had been planted? What if the trail I thought I'd uncovered had been carefully laid for me to find? Panic set in. If Howard had even half of what he claimed, I was in serious trouble. I could already imagine the headlines: Revenge turns to ruin, new Westbridge owner accused of fraud. I had worked so hard to clear my name, to rebuild my reputation, and now, it was all hanging by a thread. I needed answers. I called Jason immediately. I need you to go through all the files we pulled again, I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Everything. Double-check the logs, the emails, look for anything that seems off. Jason hesitated. What's going on? Howard might have set me up again, I said bluntly. He cursed under his breath. All right. Give me a few hours. I paced the office as I waited, my mind racing. If Howard had framed me, he was smarter than I'd ever given him credit for. And if Jason couldn't find anything to disprove it, I'd be left with two choices: pay Howard's ransom or risk everything I'd worked for. Jason called back that evening. You're not going to like this, he said. What? There are inconsistencies in the files. Some of the timestamps don't match up, and a few of the IP addresses trace back to, well, your home network. My heart sank. What are you saying? I'm saying someone hacked into your system months ago and used it to plant evidence. Whoever did this wanted it to look like you were the one pulling the strings. I clenched my fists. Howard. Most likely, Jason said. But proving it won't be easy. He's covered his tracks well. If this goes public, it's going to look really bad for you. I had 48 hours to decide: pay Howard's ransom or risk him handing the forged evidence over to the authorities. Part of me wanted to fight, to call his bluff and expose him for the manipulative snake he was. But the other part of me knew how dangerous he could be. He'd already ruined my life once. Could I really afford to give him the chance to do it again? Then, an idea hit me. If Howard wanted to play dirty, so would I. I spent the next day putting my plan into motion. Using Jason's help, I drafted a fake email from Howard to Carl Withers, the same consultant he'd worked with to frame me the first time. In the email, Howard confessed to everything: the embezzlement, the frame job, and the ransom demand. Then, I sent it to Sarah Mitchell. The new exposé dropped within 24 hours. Disgraced CEO attempts to frame former employee, shocking new evidence emerges. The article detailed Howard's latest scheme, complete with the fake confession email I'd planted. Sarah ran with it, and the story spread like wildfire. Howard never saw it coming. By the time the authorities caught up with him, he was already on the run. But his reputation was beyond repair, and any leverage he'd had over me evaporated the moment the article went live. As for me, the story painted me as a hero, a man who had fought back against corruption and refused to let his former boss manipulate him again. But here's the thing: Howard wasn't entirely wrong. The offshore account? It wasn't his. It wasn't mine either, at least not originally. But after everything he'd put me through, I'd quietly moved the stolen funds there myself. It was poetic justice. And now, as I sat in my new office, the owner of a thriving company with millions in the bank, I couldn't help but smile. Howard had tried to ruin me. Instead, he'd handed me everything I needed to win. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold. But sometimes, it's better served with interest.